All right, now we have a very, very special guest. And, JP, this is what we love, right? We're bringing people insiders and information that they're not going to get anywhere else. And we got Panthers offensive coordinator Thomas Brown joining us here on the NFL Report. TB.
Let's go. Excited to be here.
That's what I'm talking about, man. You're looking good.
Appreciate it.
You know, for the folks who are listening on the podcast, they won't see, but Thomas has got off the shrugs machine. He's kind of jacked and swole right now in our shot.
Yeah. Hey, you only get one body in life, so I gotta maximize it, take care of it, work out every day.
Yeah. They had to widen his shot to fit him in there. We're scrunched on the sides to make sure he looks good in the middle.
Hey, Thomas, just for timeliness of this, before we get on to things, a couple years ago, you blew out your Achilles tendon. You know, when you were with the Rams, you're rolling around on the scooter and everything. Look, you're a former world-class athlete, NFL running back, college running back, but what is that experience like? And just kind of walk us quickly through your rehab.
Yeah, so it was rough. So I would say I was going through a normal routine on the field, doing an individual drill. So every day we have, I would say, 20 minutes of individual. So I have the running backs and quarterbacks going through ball handle. And so I'm just kind of making those guys react off of me. And I make one step, and I feel like somebody just threw a football at the back of my ankle. So I turn around, look behind me to try to see if a ball was on the ground. And I realized there was no ball there. So I try to go take a step, and I just felt my whole kind of ankle and foot drop. So I turned to Reggie Scott and Sean McVay, who kind of standing by each other, and said, I think I just tore my Achilles. And so they thought I was joking, but I was obviously very serious about tearing the Achilles. And so Reggie asked me, are you sure? And I said, Reggie, I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure I know what happens, what goes in between the same little spot, and it is missing right now. And so my first thought was, can I get off the field? Can I walk off the field? So I did walk myself to the training room. And so a number of emotions are going through my brain. Luckily for me in that position, I'm no longer playing, so it won't affect that aspect of it. But I can imagine from a player standpoint, right, how devastating it's going to be when it comes to the initial injury, being out for the entire year, but thinking about just the rehab process going back and kind of recovering from the injury. And for myself, I mean, I'm a fairly older dude. Now I try to still be somewhat relatively young, but it took me a good, 8 to 9 months to get back to doing everything I wanted.
You were like 35. You were like 35?
Yeah, you're younger than Rodgers.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think being able to try to build back and get back into 100% shape was a tough challenge for me in my life, but it's different when it comes to being a washed-up coach versus being a player in your prime.
Come on now.
But Tom, I'm kind of curious in this. So when this happens, and not just what we saw Monday night with Aaron Rodgers, but in any instance where your starter goes down, what's the first conversation on the sideline that you have as a play caller, as an offensive coordinator, as a part of the offensive staff with that backup quarterback that's going in? What initially happens on the sideline right away?
Well, the first thing for me is just trying to make sure you ease his mind when it comes to the moment of having to come in that type of opportunity. I think every time you have a major injury on the field, I think every player kind of has that thought in the back of their mind about some significant injury happening. So my role is going to be to try to calm those guys down as much as possible. All those guys to play with a quiet mind and kind of get those guys rolling once the play starts.
So Thomas, with that situation, so we know the big deal with Aaron Rodgers going to the Jets, the quarterback. You guys have a very capable backup in Andy Dalton. I mean, as we're looking around the NFL, not every team is as fortunate as you to have somebody like that. What about you guys in Carolina having someone like Andy Dalton who's there just in case of a worst-case scenario?
I mean, I think just from the standpoint of what you mentioned, Steve, about being worst-case scenario, but I think more importantly, the everyday process of him being able to pour into Bryce from his experience, right, his exposure from being in this league for a very long time, how open Andy is, how he communicates in the media room, but also giving Bryce kind of just subtle tips and tales on the football field to help us with his overall development is awesome for us.
So he's been through a lot of games, Andy Dalton, and he's watched the film the next day with coaching staffs a lot. Bryce did that for the very first time after your game on Sunday. If you could take us, Thomas, into that room and kind of what that first film session was like after Bryce's first game, what went down in there?
Well, first off, we're all very disappointed about the outcome of the game. I think anytime we lose a football game, I've always been a very sore loser. My mom reminds me from time to time from the age I was 8 years old up until now. But I think being able to build upon some of the positive things we did offensively, but more particularly when it comes to Bryce and his overall growth and development, when you look at the tape and talk about the positive takeaways, You look at how he operates the system from a huddle standpoint, but also the sideline communication I thought was really good, especially for his first opportunity time being out. But what an opportunity to learn, like first week one, have adversity. And what I love about adversity is the opportunity to be able to take on the challenge, to learn and grow from it. And Bryce is as good as I've been around when it comes to taking on those challenges.
So when you're game planning, now that you've got a baseline, right, from the game against Atlanta, now you go to the Saints on Monday night. I mean, what is Bryce's approach? Because everything we saw in college was, okay, let's go get it. We know we did wrong. Let's go get it. Kind of tell us what it's been like working with him going into week 2.
I'm in the exact same way. I think one of the things I love about Bryce is his overall approach. Remember back when we were kind of going through the process of evaluating quarterbacks. So we're on a couple planes flying around the country to interview quarterbacks, but also watch those guys throw in person. And so I meet with all the quarterbacks, and I'm asking those guys some similar questions. And one of the questions I asked all the quarterbacks was, just take me through, okay, the game is done. It's Saturday night. What's your weekly process from the time the game ends to the next game? And so most quarterbacks had probably I would say 10 to 15-minute response, right? So we're 17 minutes into Bryce answering the question, and we're still on Tuesday morning. So I think when it comes to his overall development, like he has a great approach, a great process towards understanding how to move on past the game, learn from those mistakes, but also build upon what he did well as well also.
Well, Thomas, it was all of you guys on that plane, on this offensive staff going around. I saw a bunch of you guys at Ohio State at C.J. Stroud's pro day, and you guys were making the rounds. With that said, all of these offensive minds you guys have on this staff, how do you, I guess, in this process with a young quarterback, a number 1 overall pick, as talented as Bryce is, kind of divvy up who does what? How does it get split? Is there a meeting before? Like, do you guys devise who handles what? How does it operate within a staff when you're trying to mold him early on?
Yeah, I think the great thing about our setup is that we have a great operation when it comes to delegating roles and responsibilities. I think sometimes when it comes to having so much, whether it be mental capacity or experience in one room, depending on who you have, it can become an issue. But we do a great job when it comes to always checking your ego at the door. And we're all about trying to find ways to figure out what is right versus who is right. So I think the collaboration process we have has been amazing. It's been awesome. I look forward to kind of building that every day.
And Thomas, you talk about, the collaboration, forging an identity, right? You're a former running back. You've coached running backs. What about the run game and how important that is? And to not only helping Bryce develop, but you guys establishing what type of character you're going to be offensively.
Yeah, so, we break down our offensive identity. So we talked about this from day one. We got back here in April when our players came in. We broke it down to kind of 3 different categories. All right, number 1 was being physical at every position. And so you mentioned the run game. Everything starts with that approach up front. That's one of the biggest positive takeaways from our game is that we did a really good job of being aggressive, attacking. Running backs did a really good job when it comes to running after, making contact after the ball, kind of from a contact standpoint, fighting for extra yards. When it comes to the overall development of a young quarterback, but also offensively in general, everything builds off of that. When you talk about your play pass, your keepers, your nakeds, and obviously drop back offense as well.
Thomas, does that play off of what obviously you look at what everybody else is doing, right? And everybody kind of sees and steals from one another. Is it looking at what is a trend in defensive football in the NFL alters what you want to do offensively? Or do you look more at offensive football around the NFL and then kind of build it off that? Obviously, it's off of your personnel, but still, which side of the ball do you look at more to kind of build that identity?
What you said last was probably the most important thing, as you kind of already mentioned, when it comes to understanding your personnel and what you guys do well offensively, up front, quarterback-wise, your skill players. But, to me, it's kind of a combination of both. When you look at trends around the league from an offensive standpoint, defensively, you can get certain ideas from there from an offensive perspective, but we kind of hold true to our identity, our philosophy, and trying to build upon it every single week, but also doing a great job of self-scout. So once we have a game, obviously kind of making those corrections, but what do we put on tape? What can we build off of that? And kind of our opponents is watching to kind of, make it more difficult for those guys to defend us moving forward.
And Thomas, we saw in preseason, second half of games, you were calling the plays. Frank Reich said at some point, you guys are going to make the transition, whenever that is, this season, next season, whatever. You're going to be the play caller. How do you guys work with that? How does Frank work with you? I mean, you coach under Sean McVay and maybe teaching you some of the things and taking your input on some things so you guys can forge when that transition takes place.
Well, one, I've always been a sponge. So having an opportunity to, like you mentioned before, be in an environment with so many great minds around us. But the kind of one-on-one time with Frank every single day, we kind of put together our game plan to talk about certain ideas. Obviously, leaning on guys like Coach Caldwell as well, who can kind of obviously add advice from his vast experience from a behind-the-scenes standpoint. But I think it's about the daily collaboration and me understanding more about him and kind of vice versa, in combination with putting our players in the best spot to have success, week in and week out.
Tom, I'm fascinated by play callers. I love when guys say they're so much in the zone, they're not even looking at the sheet, right? They're just calling it. But everybody kind of has a different description of it, right? Some guys say it's a science. Some guys say it's an art. Some guys say it's a feel. How would you describe play calling?
I think the biggest part of it is about preparation. So obviously being able to have a feel on game day is important. Being able to adapt and adjust depending on what the opponent is giving you is going to be a big part of you having success on game day. But it's about what are you doing throughout the week. Putting the game from a game plan standpoint, how you bring it to life, but more importantly, how you explain those details to your players. Because ultimately, it all boils down to not how smart you claim to be or want to be as a play caller, but how smart are your players, what those guys can activate on game day.
All right, Thomas, let's take it back. We got that number 20 on at UGA. Okay, we're going back to running backs. All the conversation this offseason is running backs are devalued. Every week, all I hear is how valuable the running game is.
Right.
What is the difference between the value of running backs and the value of the running game?
Well, Steve, I'll say this. I understand the frustration around the league when it comes to some of these elite players who have continued to produce on a consistent basis and want to be rewarded for it. But all I can do is speak for us from an organization standpoint and our value. And I went up for a guy like Miles Sanders, for example, who had great value for us. And people may say from a market value standpoint, it was a little bit higher, but for just as far as how we want to be built identity-wise, it was a perfect fit for us when it comes to how we're building this system, but also great for a rookie quarterback as well.
Miles can do it all. We all know that he can do a lot of different things as a running back, Thomas. And so last one for me is you're going into your second game with your quarterback. Everybody talks about adversity when things don't go right for young quarterbacks. How do they bounce back? How do they respond? What was your take on this week? What maybe instances, if there is one, that sticks out to you most about Bryce where you said, oh, okay, this is kind of different in this guy?
Well, I think to me is what I've seen every single day since he stepped foot in his organization from a practice standpoint, preparation-wise, but also in the meeting room. I mean, he is calm, cool, collective. But one thing I did see that I love is obviously from a game play standpoint, just the fire, the emotion, the demeanor on the sideline when it comes to making plays, getting guys going, but obviously wanting to have the ball in his hands when it counts the most. So we can definitely build upon when it comes to our overall operation.
Thomas Brown, offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers. Thank you so much. Now that you finished shrugs and shoulders, don't forget leg day, Thomas. You got to stay balanced above below the waist, my man.
Start every Monday with leg day.
That's what I'm talking about.
Definitely a big part of that.
That's what I'm talking about.
Wow.
Thomas, thank you so much.
Thank you for the time.